Hello. Hello, 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 hello. Come on up, come on up, come on up. I have to say, Rework, shout out for the inclusivity at this summit. That's the first time I've ever followed a fellow Teessider speaking on stage. I've never even shared the stage with another Northerner, another Teessider, so it's nice. Cool. Thank you for joining us, appreciate that. Today we're going to be discussing successfully implementing conversational AI. We've heard quite a lot of decent talks about some specific techniques. I think what I would like to do is almost start from the beginning. We've got a panel here who are extremely experienced in implementing this kind of stuff. And at the very beginning, I don't know how many of you took the survey that was done at the beginning. I had a quick look. And the main thing that kind of came out of that poll that was run, which was asking about various different stages that you might be at and what you're trying to get from the event, and most people, I think it was something like 55 to 60%, said that it's education, lack of education, which is preventing them from doing this kind of stuff. And so hopefully what we can do today with my esteemed panel here is start from the beginning of, conversational AI and go through the whole process of what it takes to implement conversational AI within organisations. And so we'll do that in just a moment. I'm joined by Jakob on the corner here, who is from Boost.ai. We have Sonia from Lloyds Banking. We have Tripta, who recently PlayStation, has a lot of experience at Nuance, actually worked on some top secret things at Nuance. And so if we play our cards right, we might learn a few secrets today. So I will have to be subtle about it, though. So we'll start with Tripta. Specifically, what were you working on at Nuance?
Quite a lot of things.
Let's introduce ourselves first.
Yes,
introduce
please.
yourselves and the experience in this.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for attending. My name is Tripta Kumari, and I'm a UX designer. I've been in this field for about 20 years, and I've worked on all sorts of platforms over those years. And my interest in voice really goes back to my time sort of designing for phones. So that's where it comes from, because I actually did voice commands back in the day, can you believe it? And then I was lucky enough, very few people get the opportunity really to work for Nuance. And I was I was a lead UX designer for all the secret stuff. And I worked with the aviation industry, with the banking industry, and also with government as well. You'd be surprised how much the government within, I can only talk about the UK, is interested in this field. And I worked with HMRC and DWP. And if you don't know what, let me correct some of it, not correct, but let me explain. HMRC are our revenue part of the government, and DWP is the Department for Employment. And, I was working with that particular department as well. Nice. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. And Sonia at Lloyds TSB, you've got some interesting experience on the NLP side. I wonder if you can explain a little bit about what you do at Lloyds TSB and your background generally, and some examples of some of the use cases that you're working on at Lloyds.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Sonia Ingram. I'm the data science engineering lead within the natural language engineering team. And we are part of a wider team which is all around intelligent automation, which includes like robotic processes, virtual assistants, and then other kind of digital products such as ID verification and document upload, those kind of things. So my team are really focused on supercharging customer understanding. So how can we really make the best use of what our customers are telling us about themselves and their banking experiences with us? And so that's what we're focused on the data science side of things, but obviously in order to create usable and useful data science products, you need to establish like the data fabric and the back end side of things. So a lot of what we're doing is building that out, a lot of data engineering, machine learning engineering, and platform stuff as well.
Nice. I think it's one of the biggest barriers that I've seen to adoption, and we can get into some of them barriers later on, but the organisations a lack of data, for want of a better word, is one of the real limiting factors. So I'm really interested to get into that. And Jakob, tell us a bit about Boost AI. Gartner Magic Quadrant niche player as of January. So
correct.
For those who kind of follow that stuff, Gartner, you probably know of Gartner. What was really interesting at the start of this year, they did this analysis around enterprise conversational AI platforms, and there's a number of them that are here today, and it kind of helped really solidify for everybody who the kind of main players are. They picked out about 20 companies and did some thorough analysis. And yeah, it's Boost AI, we're in there, so well done. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about Boost
My
AI.
name is Jakob Mølgaard. I'm head of custom onboarding at Boost AI. So I'm responsible for taking our new customers from beginning their conversational AI journey, whether that be a chatbot or a voice bot, all the way to going live and actually working with the virtual assistant after it's deployed in a channel. And what's interesting, as you mentioned, we are very focused on the enterprise market. We have a very scalable solution, averaging more than 1,000 intents per project. And we've seen a lot of traction, especially within the government sector and banking sector, where we see there are a lot of inquiries from the end users, and where there really is this need for having a lot of intents and being able to answer many different questions from the end users.
Interesting. How many people here have implemented a conversational AI solution before? Raise your hands. Quite a few. Thank you, Jakob. Who is kind of working on something at the moment, but perhaps not kind of at production level at the minute? A few. And then who is here to kind of learn the best practice because you're considering doing something potentially? A few. Okay, so there's a mixture really. So for those who are just getting started, it might be worth, we've seen some examples, I think, here of some use cases already. You know, we've had the Bosch team, which was really good, looking at contact center. We've seen some chat kind of examples. But as businesses, you know, most businesses these days, almost every channel they have with customers kind of is conversational. Emails conversational, messaging, text messages conversational. All the social channels have conversational kind of first approaches. Even the things that we do internally within our own teams is Slack and Teams. Everything seems to be a conversational channel, doesn't it? So I wonder whether we could maybe begin with some of the use cases that you found to be working really well from a conversational AI standpoint. And in your case, Sonia, perhaps maybe an NLP sort of standpoint. I don't know, Tripta, if you want to begin with, like, what are some of the use cases that work really well for conversational AI?
Oh God, yeah. I think it depends. Actually, when I normally start designing or looking at what we need to be answering, or what would the customer be asking, and I would actually look at your things like just like your FAQs, and because I'm coming from Nuance, and we also do. We do the voice stuff every time you sort of ring up and we ask you, tell us in your own words why you're calling us. We'd be always gathering all that data, and that will give us an idea of where the demands are really, you know, where people aren't understanding something, or just they've got queries that they need answering, and that's where you would start. That's how you would start gathering the data. Your companies will already have that data. Even if you don't know how to, even if your company doesn't have that data, there's ways and means of actually acquiring that data. One of the things I did at Nuance where we didn't have much data was I actually used our own application, created an app where we would ask those questions, and we'd sort of hook that data. You know, so there are ways and means that you can do that. It all depends really on the way I look at it. Really is what people are asking for. At the end of the day, we are serving people, unless you're doing machine to machine. That's different. I didn't do that sort of stuff. But I dealt with humans. You know, I dealt with our needs. And what we wanted, and then I still had to balance that with the technology and also the business side of things as well, if we don't get away from that. But my role really was, you know, to actually tease out the real needs, and that it didn't, and us as human beings really, there are certain things like, say for example, what you're transferring money, And we were creating this application for a well-known Dutch bank. And whilst we were doing this, we discovered some new use cases which the organisation hadn't even thought about. And it was related to their current account. And they wanted to know, did that transaction actually go out? Did my last transaction happen? And we didn't even think about that when we were doing this. And we thought about what the balance is, what your balance is at the moment. If you've got, $200 or euros or whatever. But no one bothered to ask or didn't think of. They want to know the last transaction. Did it go? Did that 250 euros or pounds, dollars go? Things like that. And that comes out really of testing your stuff as well, and really thinking about the use cases that you're designing for. And not all use cases are not going to work, but they might not be as important. So,
Do you have a similar kind of approach, Jakob, to your clients? Do your clients come at you and say, we need a bot for our IVR, or we need a chatbot? Or do you have an approach to try and identify those use cases, perhaps using some of that data that Tripta was talking about there? How do you go about identifying where you should start?
Well, I would actually start a step before that, because I wouldn't recommend just getting conversational AI because it's conversational AI. Of course, it sounds nice that you have AI in your company, but you really need to use it to solve a problem. So the first thing you should do is really consider, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? Is it automation? Do we want to move traffic from a higher cost channel to a lower cost? Is it improving the customer experience, like lowering average waiting time or handling time? Or is it upsells? Is it because we want to be available for more customers and more platforms? And when that's done, I think the use cases kind of write themselves. As you mentioned, Tripta, you can find tons of information. I think you have it already from your customer service organizations, where you can see what are the most asked queries. And then you can start from there. And then as soon as you go live and you start getting traffic in, you will discover that people are actually also asking this. And when they've asked this, they follow up with this. And then you kind of broaden the scope from there. But I think the first step you need to do is really consider, what is the problem we're trying to solve? How will this create value for us as an organization, besides just being cool to say on your website that you're using conversational AI? It should be something that creates value for you as a company, and hopefully also for the end users in the end, that gives them a good customer experience.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that those kind of projects end up not scaling anywhere. If it's a point solution that's brought in without thinking about the broader strategy, it tends to reside in one division of an organisation that doesn't tend to get kind of scaled out as quickly and things like that. It can be quite difficult. That's really good. Sonia, any kind of thoughts on how you kind of go about prioritising your use cases?
Yeah, well, I agree with what everyone said, that, and as a data scientist as well, I love being able to infer what the data's telling you. So what are those use cases that we might not have thought about, like you mentioned? And I think it's really important to consider from the customer's perspective as well. So, for example, like you mentioned, if you want to do some process mining and find what the pinch points are, then this kind of dictates the need for you of, how can we improve the customer's journey and the customer's experience through leveraging the power of, voice assistants or chatbots or whatever the case may be. And I think often the kind of simplest customer journeys are the most beneficial. So something simple like you mentioned, checking, did the last payment go out? What's my balance? Changing your address, for example, on your bank accounts. I think those kind of things are probably the lower hanging fruit, but they're still very valuable at the end of the day to the customers, and can start forming that journey as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of organisations will begin, I think there's the trend over the last few years is a lot of companies beginning with something that's a bit more simplistic. As you mentioned there, low complexity, ideally kind of like high value sort of thing. If you were to go and get all of your use cases, all the conversations that you have with your customers, and almost like put them on a matrix like that, and have complexity on one line and value on the other, how do you find those to begin with that are not overly complex, because you don't want to bite off more than you can chew, but they're going to add enough value to the business that it's worth doing in the first place, kind of thing? I think that the data questions that you've I mean, it's interesting how, straight away, second question, we're already into data, just shows how important data is to be able to bring this kind of stuff to life. And a lot of organisations, as we mentioned, have trouble either getting data or analysing data. I know some tools out there that can help you. I think Human First are here, which have got some good tooling. I'm sure Boost have got some tooling as well, which allows you to kind of get into that data and figure out what's kind of going on. Let's say you've done that piece of work, you've identified a number of use cases that you want to try and look at. You've got, in the conversational AI sense, you've probably got the channel that you want to look at, because Jakob, as you said, it might stem from the problem in the call center or whatever it might be. In your case, Sonia, if you're looking at other areas to use NLP, it may be driven by the business strategy and whatever. So you've got the use cases. What do you do next? I know that a lot of teams and a lot of talk in this kind of industry goes to technology first. We were talking initially earlier on about the importance of design. Is the design phase next once you've figured out your use case? Like what comes next for you? Maybe Jakob, we'll start with you. Once you've nailed once you know what use case you want to target, what's next?
Well, first of all, we also need to set a team, like figure out who will actually build this internally. And if I'm now just speaking from my own experience, what we're looking for, let's say we're implementing a chatbot or a voice bot for a customer service center, then we would be interested in people that actually know about this. We don't want computer scientists that can help us train this model the best. We want people that are used to speaking to the end users on a daily basis, because they will best know how to phrase the answers that are given and know how best to phrase the training data. And we also want them to have a technology curious mindset, be interested in new technology and working with this state-of-the-art conversational AI, be interested in trying to improve it, because in the end, I usually phrase it like this towards our customers when we convince them to set the team and actually prioritize this as a project when they've chosen us as a supplier, to see their chatbot or their virtual assistant as a new colleague they're onboarding. Not just a piece of technology, a project they build, they go live, and then they forget about it. They need to see it as a digital colleague that they have to train and develop the same way they would with any other colleague in the customer service department. So they have to not only go live with it, but then work with it afterwards and keep looking at how can it get better, can we identify new use cases, then get them built in, look at how the conversations flow go. Are there any places where we're losing end users? Can we do anything to keep them or actually get them to complete the user journey they set out on, and keep working with developing and maintaining and making it better on an ongoing basis, and not just see it as an individual project where you put in an investment and then you're done, you can focus on something else.
It's interesting, isn't it, how with, like, not that this should be the case, but with web, a lot of companies had that mentality, which is like big build up, launch, now we're good, forget about it. Whereas conversational AI, usually the go live is the beginning as opposed to the end, which is interesting. But you mentioned there, I think you've got it nailed in terms of needing different parts of the business to come into the project team to be a part of it. People who know the business, that can understand customer needs and stuff like that. We don't just need them, we need a few more. So I wonder whether Tripta, Sonia, if you can shed some light on what other kind of skill sets do you need in the teams to be able to bring this kind of stuff together? Maybe Sonia, we'll start with you and your team, and then Tripta will go to you and your experience and yours.
Yeah, so I think there's the delivery team, right? So the people who are actually going to implement whatever solution it's going to be. But then you need to, as you mentioned, it is the start of the journey. And I think when it comes to any kind of AI, it is, you're there for the long haul. Like, you need the infrastructure in place to keep it up to date and prevent any models going stale. And you need to have a team ready to look after that. So who are the run team? Who's going to be updating this once it is live? Is it going to be the dev team? Are they now solely focused on maintaining that? And I think also during the kind of design and scoping phase, it's really important to work with, for us, like, the current colleagues who are on the front line dealing with those customers and that particular problem day to day, because a lot of the time they'll come up with insights that you just, in our kind of ivory tower of the tech scene, we just wouldn't even consider. And so we do a lot of colleague shadowing within, call centers and if like chatbot colleagues, to see what are the difficulties that they face day to day and what are their views on the new solutions that we're putting together. And I think that's really important.
I would say really get your user experience designers onto it. those guys have got a great deal of skill. They already have contacts, and I would really encourage them to be the ones pushing this. And also, I'd really encourage usability testing, guerrilla usability testing, if it's a secret project. And I've worked on secret projects where we couldn't really go out of the four walls that I was in, that's how you find information, whether something's going to work or not going to work. But also, you gain insights from others, not just, you're sort of sat there, by yourself. And definitely get your UX team. They are trained to do this, and really, really make use of those guys. That the information's there, the skills are there for them to actually go and ask those open-ended questions. I think, I would leave that.
Yeah, I think the whole kind of concept of having a design-led approach, I think, really helps, doesn't it? Because it's very easy to, as you said at the beginning, Jakob, like starting by throwing technology at it. It's AI, let's just do it, sort of thing. And you can sometimes tell, I'm sure everyone's had bad experiences with chatbots and stuff like that, where you talk to it, doesn't understand what you're saying, it's not very helpful. And a lot of that tends to come to the fact that it's kind of been... It's more of a development project than it is an experience design project. And I think, I was talking to Jordan here from Vodafone. For those of you that know Vodafone, there's the Toby chatbot. And Toby is its own personality, is its own kind of persona. And when you engage with it across different channels, you get a degree of consistency. There's a certain language it uses, certain vocabulary it uses. Same thing as kind of like Capital One's Eno. To the point where Capital One's Eno is like the front face for the business, basically. It's in emails, it's in your messaging, it's even a shortcut in your web browser. So it all comes down to figuring out what that customer experience ought to be. I think that's a kind of gap that a lot of teams have, is that they don't prioritize the conversation design element, which is a really interesting insight there. What are some of the challenges that people are likely to encounter? We could maybe infer some from what we've discussed already: data availability, team selection, and skill shortages. What are some of the other challenges that you've observed organisations facing when they're trying to do this? Maybe Jakob, again, we'll start with you and we'll go.
I think, back to my first point, that you need to have clear targets, clear goals for why you're doing this project, besides the technology being cool. So if you've set a goal for reaching a certain automation rate or a certain level of customer satisfaction using this solution, or a certain level of upsells, it's tracking this on a frequent basis and keeping the solution up to task to ensure that you're actually reaching the goals that you set out. And we're back to the fact that you have to keep developing this. And the only reason you would want to do this is, of course, you have a target and you're not quite there yet. So you should keep looking at what can we then do to move closer to this target. If it's automation rate, do we need to include more channels in the mix? If it's predicting poorly, what can we do to improve this? Do we need to expand the scope? Do we need to train the model better? And if we're seeing we're not resolving the questions the users have, can we automate more? Is it because we need some integration towards some back-end systems that will enable more self-sufficiency for the end user? I mean, having those targets as a guiding light throughout the project is something we have had struggled with, and we've had a lot of success when we've managed to establish these targets with both new and existing customers, because it makes it easy for all of us to figure out what direction we're going. Okay, we know we're targeting 80% automation. Great, we're at 60% now. How do we get the last 20%? And then you can kind of make a plan for that and move in that direction.
Nice. Tripta, what are your challenges you observed when organisations are trying to implement this kind of stuff?
They think it's easy. And it's
Is
not.
It not?
I think it's easy because they're so used to GUI, graphical user interfaces, and they love just doing it and then throwing it out there. But voice isn't that. Voice is so difficult. It's evolving, it's changing. Our language is always. I mean, English. For goodness sake, we use foreign words as well, but our it's changing, it always changes, and you've got to keep on, you've got to keep up to date with all that, and you've got to continually test, and the markets are changing, so you're looking at that. There's new people, there's new companies coming on the block, and there's new words coming into the dictionary. It's a great field to be in, and it's one that will continually sort of keep you on your toes, really. I don't think you can just throw it out there. It's not like, I can design an application, a graphical application, and go, right, okay, go and earn us some money. But when it comes to voice, it really is the opposite. And as the language changes, again, you have to continually sort of update what you're doing. And it's just one, and it's only just one channel. And there's a great deal of modality out there, so there's not everyone can use. Okay, if it's a chatbot, it's a bit different. You're typing something in, but pure voice, there's a certain part of the population that can't use voice, so there has to be another modality there. So you need to think about the customer and also the different modalities, and just keeping everything up to date. Might be challenging for some organisations, I would say.
Yeah. COVID wasn't a word that we all knew 2
Yeah.
years ago, so now all these chatbots need to understand what COVID is and all that now. Sonia, what about you? What were your challenges that you've kind of observed, either internally or when you're working with others, kind of on the NLP side of things? What are some of the common challenges?
Yeah, well, I think NLP's got its own set of challenges. Like we've mentioned COVID. I can't remember what our speech-to-text engines were transcribing when that came up as a new word. It's like, didn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, I think something we touched on, we were having a chat just before coming into the room, and something I think is probably common to a lot of large corporations, and thinking about conversational banking or any kind of conversational service that you want to implement. I think it's bringing together the common data fabric so that you have all kind of data streams about a particular customer coming in together and being accessible, so that at the point of contact for the conversational interaction that you're having, you know where the data is in their, where the customer is in their data journey, what products they've previously been interested in. You might want to look at like clickstream data, bring that in. You can see that they've been browsing, looking at new mortgage products. They might be thinking about that. And I think having that data fabric and that data infrastructure is a massive challenge, particularly for any corporations that have gone through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and there's a lot of like siloed legacy systems. So bringing that up, which is totally back end and not at all like fancy and cool, but it's essential for all the fancy cool AI that you do want to implement. Yeah. So I think that's the first key challenge, and then I think the second is integrating it with the stuff that the customer is trying to do. So if I want to say, like, Alexa, I want to open a new bank account, how do we trigger robots to start creating those journeys? How can we bring together that full journey into one space so that the customer can upload the documents that they're interested in, ask any questions they might have along the way? If something's not working, how can we assist them? Like, how can we bring that together into one conversation? And that brings a whole host of additional challenges.
That's big challenges. I mean, I've known of a lot of projects stalling for a significant amount of time because either API availability wasn't available for their core systems and things like that, and they'll try and doing some RPA kind of workaround, which isn't always successful kind of thing. So it's a huge challenge that. I'm going to start thinking about some questions. If anyone has any questions, we're going to get to some questions from yourselves in a moment. There's two final things I'd like to get to if we do have time, which is, one is measurement and the other is it's going back to the strategy around buy and build. So maybe we'll do the measurement one first, and if we've got time, we'll come to that latter one. So you mentioned, we've been talking about make sure that this stuff is pinned to an organisational goal, making sure it's part of the broader strategy, making sure you have the right people involved, making sure you've got your back end and your data in order, making sure you've got the right team. Someone asked this question a little bit earlier on to one of the other speakers, and I think we could maybe go a bit deeper if we can, because we've got a little bit more time, which is, how do you go about measuring the impact of this stuff? The success and the impact. It's at a number of different levels, isn't it? You've got the impact it's having on the organisation. You've got whether the solution itself is actually working. And I think the person who was talking before, forgive me, I forgot the name, is asking for customer feedback. Did this answer your question, yes or no? But there's other things I'm assuming that we can do as well to measure it. So maybe we'll start at the higher level and we'll go down into the specifics. So from the higher level, how have you observed organisations measuring the impact of these solutions, Tripta?
Well, because I was doing secret projects, I was I mean, these things took a while to come in, you know, for you guys to see. So I couldn't really tell you that really.
Cryptic, you're so cryptic.
Yeah.
I thought I could answer that.
Yeah, you know, I can't reveal something.
No worries.
Anyway, yeah, I'm
No worries.
really sorry.
Jakob, what about some of your less cryptic and secret projects that you've worked on? How are you measuring success?
Yeah, we have like 3 pillars that we focus a lot on with our customers now. So one thing is automation, and that is usually a mix of your resolution rate, so the ability of your conversational AI to resolve what the user intended, and then also the adoption rate. So how good are you at actually moving traffic into the channel you're trying to automate? And then of course, not just handing them over to a human in some other sense. So those 3 combined will that will produce your automation rate. And then setting a goal for that is one thing. The next thing is customer satisfaction, where one thing can of course be just asking the end user, how did you enjoy this experience? It's also looking at, for example, availability. If previously you only had phone support in regular opening hours and you suddenly have a virtual agent that's available 24/7, you can look at how many conversations are happening outside of opening hours. Or you can just look at your average handling time, average waiting time, looking at hopefully those dropping, because you could imagine that having to spend shorter time in a queue on the phone is a better experience for your end users. And then finally upsells, just looking at how many new sales are actually originating in the automated channel.
Nice. What about the level underneath that, Sonia? How do you monitor and measure the effectiveness of the actual solutions that you're building? You know, whether that's the performance, the confidence scores, or however else you might kind of do it. How do you measure the actual solutions and things?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it probably depends a lot on what the solution is. Like, how do you quantify the value? I think a lot can be, like you've kind of already touched on a lot of the things that I would say, like time saved when you're thinking about colleagues can be. So one kind of use case that we had, I suppose, was there was an area of the bank that needed to audit calls to check that if a customer declared that they were vulnerable, that we were making sure that colleagues were gaining consent to record the vulnerability and offering support to that customer. So this kind of audit work was done quite manually, like colleagues were listening to the calls and checking that this had been done, and obviously you can't listen to all the calls that come in, so it was just a small sample that were manually listened to. Whereas automating this solution, being able to transcribe and check for vulnerable customers, have consent and support been asked for, you're looking at 100% of calls, and in much closer to real time than the manual effort taken to do that. So yeah, I think that's probably part. Also, the kind of aggregate data. So if you're able to transcribe a lot of calls and pull out key metrics from them, like things that different business areas are looking at, you can create dashboards and just have an oversight of what's going on in the call centres, where are certain problems occurring in close to real time.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. We want to go to some questions in a second. I want to try and squeeze this one last question in, which is the whole build versus buy debate. So for an organisation who wants to do this, there's a number of different ways that you can go about it. You can outsource the entire thing, and a company, maybe boost.ai has this offering, which is that they will design, develop, manage, maintain, and look after the whole solution for you. You've got buying in kind of like a solution that's almost ready-made. If you look at, I think actually Boost have some pre-built models, don't you? Which is, I don't know if you're working in banking or whatever, there's certain use cases that are already kind of pre-trained. You just need to do a bit of config and some integration work and stuff like that. Then you've got kind of like bringing in a platform, which is something that you can use to build stuff yourself. You're not necessarily bringing in or building any new technology. You're bringing in a solution to do that for you. Then you've got a phase which is kind of building the solution yourself, but using component parts. So not a platform like Boost, but you're bringing in your own speech recognition and a dialogue manager. You might be using something like a Raza open source situation, and you're kind of like building something with component parts. And then you've got like the route that like Deutsche Telekom have taken, which is building from the ground up all of their own solutions. So there's a scale, isn't there, in terms of how you go about doing this. And I don't know whether we have time to get into all the details, but just any thoughts on how an organisation should think about the approach that they should take, Tripta?
I guess how deep is the pocket? Really, if you got the cash to do it, then go for it. But if you haven't, there are ways and means to do it, and start small. Really, with voice, start small, because you're gathering data, and like I said, there's already data. You've already got a lot of data. You know where the needs and demands are for, regardless of what industry that you're in. Make use of all that. If you, as I mentioned, if you've got the budget to be able to get that support, great. If you haven't, it's doable. The technology now is out there for you to do it yourself if you really want to. But then you've got to maintain it. It's not easy. It's not like just putting up a website. That you have to constantly make sure that it is optimized, not optimized, but it's still understanding the needs that you have, and all the, if there is any change, you can jump on it quickly.
Sonia, how do you approach that at Lloyds Bank, buy versus build?
I think, it's a really good question. I think, so within my team, and I guess my perspective on it, is that a two-pronged approach is always good. I think it's always good. So we do work with a lot of third parties that they're enterprise ready, you can bring them in, and they're up and running and can be utilised and start leveraging your data straight away. But we do have our own data science team. There's also always an element of data engineering for these kind of products. So I feel like there's always going to be a balance between the two, even if you are using a third-party provider. And I think also one thing I would say is the importance of taking an objective view to different third parties. So a lot of our work goes on, well, not a lot of our work, but a portion of our work is going into evaluating third-party providers. So, for example, speech-to-text providers, they could say, oh, we have 5% word error rate, this is the best transcription engine you're ever going to get, but how does it actually work on your data? Has it been tested on your compression rate, the kind of terminology and accents that your customers use, and that side of things? And I think that's really important, having like a framework that you can evaluate different companies and offerings against each other in an objective way.
That's very good. That's very good. Jakob, let me guess. Buy Boost.
Buy Boost, but I would recommend being involved in the project yourself, because in the end, what you're doing is you're automating your dialogue with your end users, your own customers. So I would be cautious if you were to outsource that completely. I think you want to have a say in how the digital channel communicates with your end users. Like, what is the tone of voice? How do we phrase these things? Is it always up to date? Are we saying the right things? I think that really needs to be in-house, or at least there needs to be some monitoring of ensuring that we're actually saying the right things, because we are replacing a quite core part of your customer dialogue with something digital here. So I would, of course, us and our partners can help with the training and building the VA, but our recommendation is really to be part of the journey when it comes to designing the conversation flows and what the chatbot or voice bot actually says.
Agreed. We are out of time. Do we have any time for questions from the audience? Yeah, a couple of questions. Yeah, anyone got any questions? Christoph, hello.
Hi, Kane. Nice to meet or to see you again.
Yeah.
So as we are talking here about successfully implementing conversational AI, and you know what is coming, I'm missing a key enabler for implementing successful conversational AI. We all know that conversational AI can be a piece of art if it's working, but it can be also super annoying. So all of us know bots that are annoying. I actually have seen way much more that are annoying. And in my experience, the key enabler is quality assurance, testing, and automation. So my question for the panel would be, how do you deal with that? Yeah, I heard from Sonia, you're having 1,000 intents. If I just expect now 100 utterances behind every intent, you have already 100,000 test cases to run in your regression. And that's just the happy path. Yeah? And regression you run with very little change. And then we might just talking about running the regression on API level against Boost AI. But how do you run these 100,000 tests in all the browser versions of your clients, in all the mobile app versions? How do you deal with things that we heard from Bosch in the morning? Background noise in the car and bad connectivity and so on. Yeah? So these are the challenges that our clients are facing, and I would like to know how you deal with these things.
Interesting. Very nice. Thank you, Christoph. How do we deal with quality assurance and testing?
I'll give it that way. I don't have to do this.
So, Jakob, how do you?
Yeah, there's two things in it. One is when we're doing the actual project, working our way towards go live. Of course, our recommendation is working in sprints, identifying areas that you want, use cases you want to build out in each sprint, and then as part of each sprint, having intensive testing regimes that can actually go in parallel with you building, as long as you just get some feedback from maybe it's your colleagues, maybe you can outsource it to some people who can start asking the chatbot or the voicebot questions. Especially for voicebots, I think testing, like the need for testing increases dramatically. But then afterwards, we're back to the fact that you should see a conversational AI as a new colleague, something you need to keep developing, keep maintaining, keep working on, because you're not just done when you go live. As soon as you start getting real conversations, then you will see that the users are asking questions that you couldn't foresee when you built it originally. So you just have to keep monitoring the questions, the conversations that come in, and make improvements on an ongoing basis.
Sonia, anything to add on how you kind of implement quality assurance for your models?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot. I think you're right that good kind of software practices are essential. We work in an agile way, so and all those levels of kind of software testing are required. And I think when it comes to deployment, it's always useful to do A/B testing if you can, and running services in parallel if that is an option that's open. And I think user acceptance testing is really key as well when it comes to conversational AI. Like, is it fulfilling the purpose that this has been designed for? And yes, as you mentioned, I think the key thing that we're all drilling home is that it is an ongoing process, and you do need to do kind of spot checks and ensure that quality remains once it has been deployed. Because I think, especially coming to model staleness and model degradation, and also the data drift that can happen, especially with this kind of conversation. Like you mentioned that the words and that people use changes a lot over time, and likewise the customer base might change over time, like the combination of accents and things that you might be exposed to.
I think if anyone's using nuanced stuff, this is, I mean, they've looked at this, but this is why you have that contract with them all the time, because it's always changing, and things are being updated all the time. It's never ending. It's not like GUI. It is very different. It's never ending, and it's the only way. We're going to understand exactly what the customer wants is if we monitor what they're asking, and we're evolving the engine accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Unsurprisingly, Christoph's company Botium has solutions in that department as well. Do we have time for one more question? Yeah. There's a mic winging its way to you. Here it is.
Hi, hello. My question is about not implementing conversational AI, but it's more about people adopting this technology. So do you have a view on what are the best strategies to increase the adoption of using this technology by your customers?
Good question.
That's a good question.
You want to say that one?
Well, okay, I'll quickly answer.